Well, boys, the wait is over. Every single Navia player has now breathed a sigh of relief because we finally have the one thing she's been asking for ever since her release. A good Geo teammate, and that is in the form of Xilonen, who will be coming out in the 5.1 patch. But I'm sure you already knew that, and you're just here to know what her kit does. So, that's why I'm here. I'm going to be explaining to you Xilonen's full kit, and who I think she's going to be good with. First of all, let's start with her role in the team. Xilonen is a Geo Sword character who will focus on giving your characters resistance shred, and also healing them or doing damage depending on what your team is looking like. And it's quite a lot to, breathe in, so let's start simple with the normal attacks. Mostly, it's just going to be standard. However, you will see that she has some defense scaling in here. This is because of her Night Soul Blessing, aka the natlan mechanic that has been introduced with literally every single natlan character. So, how do you activate it? Well, it's with her skill. But to be completely honest with you, it's just going to make you do geo damage with your normal attacks. But don't be fooled by this, she is still a support, and we will get to that when we get to her skill. Now, her skill is going to be having her do one tick of geo damage and activate her Night Soul Blessing. She will also activate her Night Soul meter, which will drain over time and start with 45 points. But you can extend this with her normal attacks while in her Night Soul Blessing form. This is part of her Ascension 1, but because it's so integral to the way her kit works, I feel like I should mention it now. When her Night Soul Blessing reaches the cap of 90, it will activate an effect which allows Xilonen to shred elemental resistances, and this is going to depend on your teammates. When one of your teammates is Hydro, Pyro, Electro, or Cryo, one of Xilonen's free crystals will become that element. And then, if it's neither of those elements, it will be a standard of Geo. And then when her Night Soul meter is maxed out, all of the elements from the crystals will be shredded. So for example, if your team looks like Xilonen, Farina, Klee, and Bennett, you will have a Pyro and Hydro resistance shred. But if you have something like Bennett, Farina, and Navia, you'll reduce Pyro, Hydro, and Geo resistance, because Navia is not one of the 4 elements that Geo can crystallize with, and the standard is Geo, which means that Geo resistance will be shredded. The value at level 10 is 36%, which is almost on par with Viridescent Rare. This is very strong because animal characters are just good in general since they can run Viridescent. It's just that there's some that are a step above the rest, causing the rest to not see much use. And that's why I see Xilonen being so good, because she's also capable of running a supportive artifact set. But we'll get to that in a second, because first, I would like to cover her Elemental Burst. She'll do one hit of Geo damage, and then depending on the effects of her skill, she will do one of 2 things. First of all, if you have 2 elemental conversions, which means 2 teammates that are not Geo, Animal, or Dendro, she will heal the team. And I'm just gonna say it right now, her healing is busted. On a 3000 defense build, which should be doable if you run triple defense on a defense weapon, you will be healing for 7000 per tick. That is an absurd amount of healing, and that's not even on a healing-centric build. Now imagine if you're on her signature weapon. You can get that kind of healing with just ER defense crit. But that's because her signature weapon gives an insane amount of defense, which I will get to again later. Now, if you do not have 2 teammates that allow for her skill to be converted to a different element, she will simply do Geo damage. Now, this is still pretty good because the damage of this isn't really that bad. It's actually a pretty respectable amount of damage. So no matter what kind of team you put Xilonen into, she will have very good value. But I do think that this is kind of just a laugh at Itto, because we thought we could finally be using Itto with Farina, and then they do this to us. So, unfortunate, but we're gonna have to deal with it. Now for the Ascension passives. I've kind of mentioned her Ascension 1, but I suppose I should talk about it a bit more. So, while she is in her Night Soul Blessing, her normal and plunging attacks will be buffed depending on what her skill has done. If you have gotten 2 elemental conversions on her skill, which, again, reminder, happens when your teammates are one of the 4 crystallizable elements, she will be able to generate Night Soul points with her normal and charge attacks. But if this is not the case, which means at least 2 of her crystals are still Geo, instead her normal and plunging attacks will be dealing increased damage. This not only makes her able to do the resistance shred when she is being used as a support, this also means that you are able to main DPS Xilonen, which I think is very cool. And she might be the first hybrid character in Genshin Impact. And when I say hybrid character, I mean something like the Hersher of Sentience in Honkai Impact, which you are able to be both a support and a main DPS. As for her Ascension 4, when Xilonen maxes out her Night Soul gauge, she'll be able to trigger her own unique Night Soul burst, which can be triggered once every 14 seconds. And additionally, when nearby team members create a Night Soul burst, Xilonen's defense will be increased by 20% for 15 seconds. This is very unique and makes her synergize pretty well with the current natlan characters, but considering the fact that she is Geo, I'm not sure how she would really fit into some of these teams, especially for Kinich. So we're just gonna have to look at that in a bit. But it seems the core of her kit is absolutely her skill, with her ultimate just being an extra add-on. Now, before I dive into her signature weapon and her Constellations, I would like to first just say what teams I think Xilonen is going to be used in. She is very similar to Kazuha, where she is able to buff characters of the Hydro, Pyro, Cryo, and Electro element. But she has another trick up her sleeve, being the fact that she is able to buff Geo characters as well. But it is going to be mainly the Geo characters that are also able to use other elements. So I can even see Ito's team being changed to Farina Bennett with Xilonen and then Ito himself, just so he can take advantage of Xilonen's ridiculous buffing. And because in this team Xilonen will be healing, it means your Farina is actually usable, which is very nice. But the character I think is going to benefit the most from Xilonen by an absolute long shot is going to be Navia. Navia has not had a proper Geo support ever since her entire release. And when Chiori was revealed during the event that was happening during her banner, we all thought Chiori was going to be that Geo support. But she ended up having complete anti-synergy with the character. But now with Xilonen, she finally has that complete team that she's been asking for ever since she came out. And based on my calculations, her ceiling has reached incredible new heights. So not only is Navia one of the most friendly, low-investment characters in the game, thanks to her team with Xiangling, Bennett, and Kachina, she is also now one of the better, higher-investment characters in the game because of Farina, Xilonen, and Bennett. So you really cannot go wrong with pulling Navia anymore. And because Xilonen is capable of running the Hero of Cinder City set, not only does she give 36% resistance shred, she also gives 40% damage bonus, which is an absurd amount of buffing. Don't worry, Navia is not the only character Xilonen is going to be good with though. I can see Xilonen being good with Yoimiya as well, because this allows Yoimiya to use Farina effectively, because she was stuck with Bennett before, but now because Xilonen is a team-wide healer, you are able to use Farina with Yoimiya. And if you're worrying about interruption resistance, you can always go back to Xingqiu instead of Yelan, but let's be honest, most people are going to be using Yelan here. And I think what's really funny is the fact that she's also a buff for Nouvelette. Nouvelette's best 4 slot used to be an Archaic Petra Zhongli, which was really annoying to play around and didn't give you all that much offensive buffing in the real talk. But now with Xilonen, you're not just getting resistance shred, which is higher than Zhongli, and damage bonus, which is higher than Archaic Petra, but you're also getting a team-wide healer, which means Farina is stacking even faster than normal. And this is going to make Nouvelette an insane character, even in single target, which I find kind of ridiculous, because he's already the king in AoE. Might as well have him be less impressive in single target, but no, Xilonen will just not allow it. But Xilonen giving resistance reduction and damage bonus does put her into contention with Kazuha, who is the current res reducer and damage percent buffer in the game. Now, when I compare the two, I would like to make clear that Xilonen has advantages over Kazuha and Kazuha has advantages over Xilonen, and I think they are really well balanced around each other. Kazuha is going to be superior in AoE thanks to his grouping, and he also has a higher resistance reduction than Xilonen does. However, Xilonen has a higher personal damage output and has a longer duration on her buffs, making it consistent for more rotations. Have a quick look at this list to see if I think Kazuha is going to be better, Xilonen is going to be better, or if they're using neither, or if they're using both. So pause the video if you want to analyze it. But Xilonen gets even more insane when you look at her signature weapon, because it might be one of the better signature weapons I've seen, because it gives Xilonen everything she needs. It gives an absolute insane amount of defense on the second stat, and it gives you even more defense on the passive, being up to 20%. And now, when you have both of these stacks, not only do you have more defense, you also gain more crit on Xilonen, being up to 3.2% crit rate and 25.6% crit damage, which also incentivizes her damage output. But it's not even over, because a support weapon is never good enough without the supportive quality. And Xilonen has that in the form of a 25.6% damage bonus buff to the entire team. I have no doubt that a C0R1 Xilonen will be able to beat a C0R1 Kazuha in almost any team. But Kazuha does still have some advantages in the form of extra elemental application and grouping. So I would really like to emphasize that Xilonen is not Kazuha power creep, but rather a Kazuha alternative, because they ultimately focus on doing different things. Now that I've discussed Xilonen's weapon, I think it's best if we look at her Constellations next. Now, her C1 will do the classic thing of making it so Xilonen will have more Nightsoul points for exploration, blah blah blah. But additionally, when Xilonen's skill is active, it will buff the active character's interruption resistance. This interruption resistance increase is the same as that of Cyno's burst, so it's pretty disappointing. But considering the fact that it also stacks with other forms of interruption resistance, it becomes a lot better. So don't sleep on this constellation entirely. C2 will make it so that the characters who are buffed by Xilonen's skill will gain an additional effect based on their element. If it's Geo, they will gain 30% crit rate. If they are Pyro, they will gain 40% attack. If it's Hydro, they will gain 40% max HP. If it's Cryo, they'll gain 50% crit damage. And then finally, if it's Electro, they will restore 20 energy and their burst cooldown will be decreased by 5 seconds. This is an incredibly powerful C2, and I don't think I need to tell anyone that. Giving Linny or Arlecchino an extra 40% attack, giving Nuvola an extra 40% defense, giving Navia an extra 30% crit rate, assuming you're not C2, is going to be quite a big buff. So this is honestly up there for what I would consider potential for the best C2s in the game. Her C3 will level up her elemental skill, which is the main meat of her kit. Definitely pretty useful. C4 will give characters a flat damage buff based on 65% of Xilonen's defense whenever they trigger a normal charged or plunging attack, which can be triggered up to 6 times. Now honestly, I don't think this is too good of a C4. It's a nice amount of extra damage, but it's not enough to justify getting the C4. C5 will level up her burst, which is going to be leveling up the majority of her sub DPS and also her healing. But her healing is already so powerful, I don't think it needs an increase, and if you're getting C5 on a 5-star character, you're not really using them as a sub DPS, so the C5, I wouldn't get it on its own. And then there's C6, which will turn Xilonen into a full-blown main DPS. Whenever Xilonen uses her normal or plunge attacks while in a Night's Soul Blessing state, she will gain Imperishable Knight's Blessing. Now, essentially what this means is that for 5 seconds, Xilonen Night Soul points will not decrease, and her time limit will not take effect, because it does have a 9-second time limit, which I didn't mention before because I didn't see it as relevant for C0, but considering C6 is as a main DPS, it is relevant. Her normal and plunging attacks damage will also increase by 300% of her defense, which is higher than Chiori's C6 scaling. So that is very nice. But all this really does is give Xilonen extra damage for 5 seconds. So if you don't kill the boss in that time, it's not that impressive, which is why I believe C6 Chiori will be better as a C6 Geo main DPS, and even Navia considering the fact she is able to nuke down bosses. Personally, I'm really happy with how Xilonen has turned out, because she's the Navia buffer I've been waiting for since her release, which, may I remind you, is almost a year at this point. But what do you guys think of Xilonen? I recommend that you guys tell me in the comments down below what you think, and maybe even subscribe or leave a like on the video while you're at it. But that'll be all from me. Peace.